Antarctic explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton was a man with lofty goals. He was a big man, not physically, but in character. He had a big personality. Incredibly charismatic, he was an exceptional leader. He was very good at inspiring loyalty in others, at rallying people together. He was very, very ambitious. Some might say overconfident. Because despite his big personality, despite his ambition and natural leadership skills, despite being knighted, despite his later fame, Ernest Shackleton was really a huge failure. Yeah, almost everything this man did failed. He failed to reach the South Pole first. He failed to cross the continent of Antarctica. He failed in many business endeavors, tobacco, stamp collecting, a Hungarian mining venture. He failed miserably in politics. He spent most of his life in debt and died penniless in 1922. And yet, the story I'm about to tell you, while yes, an epic failure in many ways, is also one of the greatest success stories of all time. Because turns out failure and success are not mutually exclusive, and sometimes you must fail in order to succeed. Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Shay LaFontaine, and you're listening to History Fix, where I discuss lesser-known true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. Ernest Shackleton just keeps popping into my life, and not like in the same way as Thomas Jefferson or Christopher Columbus or Thomas Edison or Henry VIII. Not like that. In a different way. He's not in everyone else's stories like they were. He's sort of off doing his own thing, and yet he keeps coming up. People keep randomly, organically mentioning him to me. Gary Arndt in episode 116 about UNESCO, and then the whole Endurance Endeavor mix-up in episode 118 about shipwrecks. He's been hanging out in my subconscious for a long time, and I need to figure out why. This may be very woo-woo of me, but I tend to look for signs from the universe. Coincidences, some might call them. They happen a lot, actually, with this podcast, and they often reassure me that I'm on the right path. The universe has been forcing Ernest Shackleton on me for quite some time, and I've mostly been ignoring it. I'm starting to realize I think there's a lesson in this story, and I don't totally know what it is yet, but there's an important lesson that needs to be learned here. So I'm going to tell you the story of Ernest Shackleton and his many failures, and let's see if we can figure out what it is the universe is trying to teach me, or us, I guess. And if you haven't checked out the video version of History Fix yet on either YouTube or Patreon, this might be the episode to watch. There are so many amazing images, photographs that go along with this story. This is all very well documented, so it's super cool to see the images with it. Ernest Shackleton was born in Kildare, Ireland in 1874. His father was originally a farmer, and there were 10 children in his family. Shackleton was the second born, and he was also the first of 2 sons. So yeah, they had 2 boys and I guess 8 girls. The other son, his brother Frank, fun, completely unrelated side story, he would go on to gain a bit of notoriety as a suspect in the theft of the jewels of the Order of St. Patrick, which are also called the Irish Crown jewels. So these were stolen in 1907 and never recovered, actually. Who knows what happened to them? Frank was later exonerated, but for a minute there, he was a suspect in this very highly publicized crown jewel theft. So anyway, the father of the family, Henry Shackleton, he was a farmer, right? But in 1880, when Ernest was just 6 years old, he gave up being a farmer and he went to school to study medicine at Trinity College in Dublin. 4 years later, now qualified as a doctor, Henry moved his family to London. And so here, right out of the gate, we already sort of see inspiration for the young Ernest Shackleton. In the span of just a few years, his father completely reinvented himself from farmer in rural Ireland to doctor in London. So witnessing this as a child, 6, 8, 10 years old, Shackleton must have believed from a very young age that anything was possible, right? You want to be a doctor? Go be a doctor. You want to explore Antarctica? Go do it. What's stopping you? His father kind of wanted him to be a doctor too, but Shackleton had other plans. At the age of 16, he left school and he joined the Merchant Navy. 8 years later, in 1898, he became a certified master mariner, which meant that he could now command a British ship anywhere in the world. So this opened up a lot of doorways for Shackleton, who was still only 24 years old at that time. He served on a couple different ships and then on a ship called Tintagel Castle during the Boer War in 1899. And there, while serving on that ship, he met an army lieutenant named Cedric Longstaff, who would unexpectedly change the course of Shackleton's life. I love tracing things back to these little serendipitous chance encounters like this. So this guy he met, his father, whose name was Llewellyn W. Longstaff, he was one of the main financial backers of an expedition that was being organized in London called the British National Antarctic Expedition. Shackleton's interest was piqued, right? Antarctica, a literal frozen desert wasteland, sounds great. And he used his connections with the guy's son, this financial backer's son, to secure himself a place on the expedition. He was going to Antarctica. This expedition would come to be called the Discovery Expedition because that was the name of the ship, Discovery, and it was led by a guy named Robert Falcon Scott, whom Shackleton would eventually become sort of frenemies with, as you will see. So they kind of go on to develop like a little bit of a rivalry. Anyway, at first, they seem to have gotten along quite well. The ship arrives in Antarctica by way of New Zealand in January of 1902, and the purpose of this expedition was just exploration, really, scientific and geographical research, exploration. And, in my mind, I was like, oh no, January, why would they go in the middle of winter? No, January is actually the middle of summer in Antarctica. So they get there, middle of summer, ideal timing, they set up camp. When winter does come, they are mostly confined to the iced-in ship. Shackleton serves to sort of entertain the crew. He edited the expedition's magazine, which was called the South Polar Times. And according to steward Clarence Hare, Shackleton was, quote, the most popular of the officers among the crew, being a good mixer. So he's quite well liked, sort of keeping morale high that first winter. He recognizes the importance of morale early on. Now, in November, as things are thawing back out a bit, Scott chooses 2 of the men to join him on this little mission where they're going to set off across the land on foot to do some exploring. And really, they just want to see like how far south they can get. They want to reach the farthest south latitude that they can. So Scott chooses a scientist and doctor named Edward Wilson as one of the men, handy guy to have around in that sort of situation, right? I'll take him. And then he picks Ernest Shackleton as the other man. So he must have seen something in Shackleton that was valuable enough to pick him for this little mini expedition. So they set out with 22 dogs and sleds and stuff, and they reached the record farthest south latitude at the time, 82 degrees and 17 minutes south. But overall, it doesn't go well. All of the dogs, all 22 dogs, die after their food becomes tainted. And I don't really know what that means specifically. It rots, it goes bad, it spoils, and all the dogs die. And just so you know, guys, going into this, there are a lot of animal deaths in this story. Sorry, I know. I really hate it too. I want all the dogs and cats and horses to live always and forever. I don't really care how many people die in a story, as long as all the animals live and thrive. But this is not that kind of story, unfortunately. So the dogs die. The 3 men, Scott, Wilson, and Shackleton, are suffering from snow blindness, frostbite, and scurvy. Shackleton gets pretty sick We know because Edward Wilson wrote in his diary entry on January 14th, 1903, quote, "Shackleton has been anything but up to the mark, and today he is decidedly worse. Very short-winded and coughing constantly, with more serious symptoms which need not be detailed here, but which are of no small consequence 160 miles from the ship, and full loads to pull all the way." End quote. And so there's this vibe of Shackleton isn't pulling his weight, literally. And then there's also this vibe of maybe Shackleton isn't well enough for this expedition. Whatever the reason, Scott decides to send Shackleton home on a relief ship after the three men return back to the ship in February. So some theorize that Scott actually resented Shackleton's popularity amongst the crew and just used this bout of illness as like an excuse to get rid of him. Second in command Albert Armitage claimed that there had been a falling out between Scott and Shackleton on that journey south, but that's unsubstantiated. Armitage didn't actually go with them on that little mission, so, what does he even really know about it? Shackleton makes his way back to England. He recovers. He gets married to a woman named Emily Dorman, and they have 3 children together. He has some business and political failures during this time. In 1905, he became a shareholder in a company that was planning to make a fortune transporting Russian troops home from the Far East. Anyone else reminded of the Sultana disaster here? Episode 118? Same kind of situation, but that doesn't amount to anything. And then he unsuccessfully ventures into politics. So when all that fails, he decides he's going to return to Antarctica because it went so well last time, right? And so now, this time, he wants to head his own expedition to Antarctica with a specific goal in mind. He wants to be the first person to reach the South Pole. So he starts raising funds, finding investors for this expedition, which will come to be called the Nimrod expedition, because that's what the ship was called, the Nimrod. And if you're confused about that name, I was too. So I looked into it, because today, a Nimrod is like a stupid person, right? It's like a fool, a foolish person. So why would they name the ship that? Well, that's a fairly new meaning of the word Nimrod. It's actually a word from the Bible that meant mighty hunter before the Lord. A Nimrod was a skilled hunter. That's what the word originally meant. It was actually, interestingly enough, it was actually the cartoon Bugs Bunny that changed the meaning because they would refer to the character Elmer Fudd as a Nimrod, a skilled hunter. In an ironic way, though, like in like a sarcastic way, because he wasn't, right? He wasn't a good hunter at all, but no one really knew what the word Nimrod meant, right? It was just like not hitting the mark. It was going right over people's heads. They didn't know it meant skilled hunter, and so they missed the sarcasm altogether. They just thought it meant like a fool, because he was a fool. So there you go. When the ship was named Nimrod, it still meant skilled hunter, not a foolish person. So during the earlier expedition Shackleton had gone on with Robert Falcon Scott, they had established a hut at a place they called McMurdo Sound. This was like a base of operations, right? Like a fort that Scott had left behind. So during this trip, it'd be super convenient for Shackleton to just head straight for that spot, right? It's already established. There's stuff there. There's beds, there's supplies, shelter, etc. But no. Apparently, before he leaves England, he is pressured into promising Scott that he would not land at or use the McMurdo hut. So there's definitely a rivalry of sorts going on, right? Shackleton and Scott are competing at this point with each other to some extent to be like the top Antarctica explorer. So Scott is like, fine, go, but don't you dare use my hut. You have to build your own hut. And that's kind of the plan going forth. Shackleton's going to go to a new spot and not sort of like encroach on Scott's territory. Scott's hut is actually still there. It's actually really cool. If you're watching the video version of this episode right now, you're seeing images of it pop up on the screen. It's not like glamorous at all, but it's something. It's better than nothing. But Shackleton can't use it, right? He promises Scott that he won't use it. So they set off in August of 1907, and they reach New Zealand by November. And from there, they're actually towed the 1,650 miles from New Zealand to Antarctica in order to conserve coal that they'll need once they get there. They arrive in January of 1908, but their target destination, remember, not McMurdo Sound, not Scott's Hut, this new place is found to be full of unstable ice. They can't stay there. So despite his promise to Scott, Shackleton is kind of forced to head towards McMurdo Sound anyway. And they go about 24 miles north of Scott's Hut to a place they name Royd's Point. But it's, it's close. They're basically in Scott's territory, but whatever, they kind of have to be. They wait through the next winter, and then in October, Shackleton chooses 3 guys who are going to accompany him on a mission to get to the South Pole. Frank Wild, Eric Marshall, and Jameson Adams. In January of 1909, they reach a new farthest south latitude of 88 degrees and 23 minutes. So new record set there. But remember, the South Pole is their ultimate goal. They do not make it to the South Pole, though. They end up having to turn around or risk starvation. They're running out of food. They have to eat half rations on the way back to make it last. And I'm not talking about like half of a breakfast, half of a lunch, and half of a dinner. Half rations was 1 biscuit per day. At one point, Shackleton gives his 1 biscuit for that day to one of the other men, Frank Wild, who's not doing very well. And Wild would write about this in his diary. He wrote, quote, "All the money that was ever minted could not have bought that biscuit, and the remembrance of that sacrifice will never leave me," end quote. They survived. They made it back to camp, although they did not achieve their goal of reaching the South Pole. Another group that was part of the expedition became the first people to climb Mount Erebus, which is a volcano in Antarctica. And Shackleton's group, when they were like on their way to the South Pole, never made it, they discovered the Beardmore Glacier while attempting to reach the South Pole. So Shackleton returns to England after this, a hero. He was actually knighted by King Edward VII upon his return. Edward VII was the son of Queen Victoria and her successor to the throne. So he receives a hero's welcome, but he is not himself totally satisfied with the outcome of the expedition. His wife Emily later recorded, quote, "The only comment he made to me about not reaching the pole was, 'A live donkey is better than a dead lion, isn't it?' And I said, 'Yes, darling, as far as I'm concerned.' And we left it at that," end quote. In 1910, Shackleton did the coolest thing ever. He made a series of 3 voice recordings using an Edison phonograph. So if you remember back to episode 97 about Thomas Edison, see, he's one of the guys who just keeps butting into everyone else's stories. Rude. But if you remember back to the Edison episode, the phonograph is like the only thing Edison actually truly invented from scratch on his own without borrowing a lot of ideas and inspiration from other people. It was essentially an early voice recorder. And so Shackleton recorded accounts of this Nimrod expedition. And I have a 3-minute recording of one of those phonographs he made. I'm going to share with you guys. I know it's a little bit hard to hear. There's kind of like a lot of background static. If you're watching the video version on YouTube or Patreon, there are captions with it. For audio only folks, I'm going to drop like a little transcript of what he's saying in the description if that helps. You can understand it, but it's not super clear. So just in case you need to read it as well. He talks about a harrowing experience while they're trying to get to the South Pole where they lose a pony actually down a cavern. I warned you, right? There's a lot of animal deaths in this episode. Sorry. And they have to do this relay thing then where they carry like half their stuff a mile and then they go back and they get the other half of the stuff and they carry it a mile and so on. A lot of work. No wonder they almost starved. But it's really, really cool to hear Shackleton actually telling us the story. So this is the actual voice of Ernest Shackleton recorded in 1910.
Main results of the British Antarctic expedition of 1907 under my command are as follows. We reached a point within 97 geographical miles of the South Pole. The only thing that stopped us from reaching the actual point was the lack of 50 pounds of food. Another party reached for the first time the South Magnetic Pole. Another party reached the summit of a great active volcano, Mount Erebus. We made many interesting geological and scientific discoveries and had many narrow escapes throughout the whole time. A typical narrow escape was when we were going up the great glacier towards the pole. We were marching along, 3 of us harnessed to one sledge in very bad light. Our last pony was being led by another man with 500 pounds of stores. All of a sudden, we heard a shout of help from the man behind. We looked round and saw him supporting himself by his elbows on the edge of a chasm. There was no sign of the pony, and the sledge was jammed with its bow in the crevasse. We rushed back and helped the man out, and then hauled the sledge out. Then we lay down to have a look, but nothing but a black gulf lay below. The pony may have fallen 1,000 or 1,500 feet. Anyhow, he had gone. What had happened was this. We, the first 3, with our weight distributed, crossed in safety, in the bad light, the bridge over an unseen chasm. The weight of the pony following was too much. It crashed through, but the swingle tree of the sledge snapped, and that saved the sledge. The man leading the pony said that he just felt a rushing sort of wind. The rope was torn out of his hand. He flung himself forward and thus escaped. After this, we 4 men had 1,000 pounds to pull, and we were unable to pull the whole load at once, so we had to relay. That is, we hauled half our load for a mile, then we walked back a mile, and then we hauled the other half up. So for every mile we gained to the south, we had to cover 3 to do it. And slowly we arose up the largest and the longest glacier in the world, some days spending 12 hours doing 3 miles, other times spending nearly half the day hauling each sledge up by means of the alpine rope. And thus we went along, and thus we returned, having done a work that has resulted in great advantage to science, and for the first time returning without the loss of a single human life. And throughout all this, I was helped by a party of men who were regardless of themselves and only thinking of the good of the expedition. I, Ernest Shackleton, have today, March the 30th, dictated this record.
I just thought it was so cool to hear his actual voice. So that was recorded 115 years ago, guys. That's wild. So Shackleton's back in England, right? He's been knighted. He's received this hero's welcome, but he's actually in serious debt after the Nimrod expedition. This is when he attempts all these various business ventures, probably to try to get out of debt, but they all fail, which probably puts him in even more debt. He tries starting a tobacco company. He comes up with a scheme for selling special postage stamps to stamp collectors. He tries to develop some sort of Hungarian mining venture that he had acquired. All of it fails. So what now? Go back to Antarctica, I guess. Except by now, the South Pole had already been reached by someone else. Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen was the first to finally reach it in 1911, followed shortly thereafter by none other than his main rival, Robert Falcon Scott. So that life goal to be the first to reach the South Pole is donezo, right? 2 people have already done it. Shackleton comes up with a new goal. Don't worry. He's going to be the first person to cross Antarctica, to cross the whole continent. And he starts planning this expedition and gathering investors. So here's the plan this time. He is going to land in the Weddell Sea, which you get to from Argentina. So you go to Argentina and then you go to South Georgia Island, and then south from there to the Weddell Sea. That's where he's going to land. And then he's going to walk across the whole continent to reach the other side, which is McMurdo Sound, Scott's Hut, which you get to, remember, by going through New Zealand. There will be another ship waiting. So 2 ships, the Endurance, which Shackleton will be on, will go to Argentina, South Georgia Island, Weddell Sea. Which has there ever been a more aptly named ship than Endurance? My goodness, you'll see why. Anyway, a second ship named Aurora is going to go the New Zealand to McMurdo Sound route. And they're going to be laying supply depots of food and fuel and whatnot from their side. Because Shackleton and his men, they can't possibly carry enough to make it the whole 1,800 miles across. So the idea is they get to a certain point and these guys have already reached it from the other side, laying these supply depots, and now they have the food to complete the journey. A lot of people, crazily enough, this does not appeal to me at all if you can't tell, but a lot of people wanted to join this expedition. There were reportedly over 5,000 applications to join Shackleton's crew. He's a popular guy, right? After all. According to Wikipedia, quote, at times, his interviewing and selection methods seemed eccentric. Believing that character and temperament were as important as technical ability, his questions were unconventional. Physicist Reginald James was asked if he could sing. Others were accepted on sight because Shackleton liked the look of them, or after the briefest of interrogations. He loosened some of the traditional hierarchies to promote camaraderie, such as distributing the ship's chores equally among the officers, scientists, and able seamen. He made a point of socializing with his crew members every evening after dinner, leading sing-alongs, jokes, and games. He finally selected a crew of 56, shared equally, 28 men on each ship, end quote. So he gets the investors, he gets the ships, he gets the crew, he gets the dogs. They have 68, maybe 69, depending on which source you're reading, dogs. And they have a cat named Mrs. Chippy, even though it was a male cat, who belonged to the carpenter on the Endurance. Of note, they did not bring ponies this time. They brought ponies on the Nimrod. This is also something that Scott was doing. But the ponies proved too difficult in Antarctic weather and, falling down ravines into caverns and stuff like what's recorded in Shackleton's voice recording. So no ponies this time, thank goodness. The ponies are safe and they get ready to set out. But then on August 3rd, 1914, something big happens. Really big. World War I begins. Now, ships have been grounded for much, much less than this. But First Lord of the Admiralty at that time, Winston Churchill, who we know will go on to become Prime Minister later, Churchill, bless him, gives Shackleton the go-ahead. Proceed. And the expedition sets out despite the war on August 8th. So we've got, on the Endurance, we have Shackleton leading the whole expedition. Frank Worsley is commanding the Endurance ship, and Aeneas McIntosh is commanding the other ship, Aurora. Then we have Frank Wild back again as second in command. We have a meteorologist who also plays the banjo. We have 2 surgeons, a geologist, dog handlers. We have a physicist, a carpenter who is the owner of Mrs. Chippy. We have a biologist, a photographer named Frank Hurley, who took a bunch of really cool photos, a lot of which will be popping up on the screen in the video version of this episode. Google Frank Hurley if you're into photography, guys. Dude was incredible. He was an Australian photographer. He took all of these amazing photos of the Endurance expedition. He has crazy live action combat photos from World War I. Wild stuff in an early age of photography. This guy is incredible. very talented crew overall in many ways. Shackleton has handpicked this crew very specifically, and not just for their professions, right? The banjo playing, for example, was probably a big deciding factor. He had a large pool to choose from, over 5,000 applicants. So these guys are the best of the best, based on the rather strange criteria that Shackleton used to choose them. He likes them, at least, right? We can say that he really liked these guys. Except for one guy. I mean, I don't know. He may have grown to like this guy eventually, but he did not pick him. There was also a 19-year-old stowaway on board, a Welsh sailor named Percy Blackborough, who had not been chosen by Shackleton to join the crew. He just snuck on board, snuck on the ship anyway. And by the time he was discovered on the ship, it was too late to turn the ship around and take him back. And so Shackleton assigned him to work the ship's galley, which is essentially the kitchen. If you're watching the video version, you're seeing a picture of him, of Percy Blackborough, with Mrs. Chippy, the cat, perched on his shoulder. It's very cute. Okay, so the Endurance left Plymouth, England for Buenos Aires, Argentina. And from there, from Argentina, it went to South Georgia Island. And then on December 5th, 1915, it left South Georgia Island and headed towards the Weddell Sea off of Antarctica. But disaster struck pretty much immediately. On January 19th, the Endurance became frozen, right? It got stuck in an ice flow. It froze to the ice in the Weddell Sea. After about a month of not being able to go anywhere, Shackleton realizes that they are likely trapped until the following spring, which starts in September. So it's February right now, right? And they're going to be stuck until September. That's 7 months. So time to hunker down. Shackleton turns the ship into a winter station, and they start to slowly drift north with the ice over the next few months. They just have to wait it out. September comes. Shackleton, remember, is hoping that as the ice melts, the ship, which has been frozen to the ice, will finally come free. But that is not what happens. Instead, as the ice melts, it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the ship's hull, and by the end of October, it can no longer take the pressure, and water starts rushing into the Endurance. So this is bad, right? They have no choice at this point but to abandon the ship. They get off the ship, and they're just on the ice. All the men and the dogs, all the equipment and provisions that are left are transferred to camps on the ice. And it's a good thing that they got off the ship, because in late November, the wreck of the Endurance officially goes down, sinks below the surface of the freezing water. Mrs. Chippy, the cat, unfortunately did not make it. They shot Mrs. Chippy. I know, you guys, I know. I told you the animals do not fare well in this story. Prepare yourselves. There will be more. They shot her because it was a mercy killing. Okay, they knew that she would not survive the ordeal. Cats can't live on ice, and they didn't want her to suffer. So they were trying to be humane about it. The dogs, these are snow dogs. They're better equipped to survive on the ice. And so they are spared for now. Okay, for now. Over the next 2 months, they camp out on this hunk of floating ice. Shackleton is hoping that they will drift towards Paulet Island, which is around 250 miles away, where they know that some provisions have been stored. They don't have an endless supply of food. Their food supplies are dwindling. They're hunting seals, but still, it's difficult to feed 28 men and almost 70 dogs. And at some point in here, they realize they have to kill the dogs. Okay, they cannot afford to feed the dogs. They need the food to keep themselves alive. Shackleton wrote, quote, "Owing to this shortage of food and the fact that we needed all that we could get for ourselves, I had to order all the dogs except 2 teams to be shot. It was the worst job that we had had throughout the expedition, and we felt their loss keenly." End quote. Frank Hurley, the photographer, wrote, quote, 4 teams of dogs were shot, Misters Wilds, Creans, McIlroys, and Marstons, comprising a total of 30 magnificent sledgers. This step has been given lengthy consideration, and the decision is a wise one. The dogs consuming 1 seal daily, the same lasting the entire party 3 days, end quote. And then Alfred Lansing writes about in detail how they went about shooting the dogs. But I'm not even going to read you that because it's like the saddest thing I've ever read, and I really wish I had read it. But what it comes down to is like either we kill the dogs or we all die, right? Us and the dogs. So they've had to kill most of the dogs. Some of them, 2 teams, are still alive for now. So they are hoping to drift to this Paulet Island. They get within 60 miles of it, but they cannot get to it, okay? They can't get over the ice to reach it. And then on April 9th, the ice floe that they've been camping out on breaks apart into 2 chunks. Not good, right? The ice is becoming unstable. Shackleton orders the men to get into the lifeboats at this point and head for the nearest island, which is called Elephant Island, and it's about 346 miles from where the Endurance sank. No, there are not elephants on Elephant Island. It's named that because there are elephant seals there. And also the island itself is kind of shaped like the head of an elephant, which you're seeing now if you're watching the video version. It doesn't seem like a very aptly named island, but it actually is, considering those 2 things. So it takes them about 5 days in the lifeboats to get there. And at some point during this 5-day journey, the photographer, Frank Hurley, he loses his mittens, and Shackleton gives him his own mittens, suffering frostbite on his hands because of it. Such was his concern for his crew. So they get to Elephant Island, but there are no provisions there. It's super far from any like shipping lanes. It's very inhospitable. There is a slim chance of anyone stumbling upon them on Elephant Island. No one goes to Elephant Island, right? So no one is coming to rescue them there, and they know that. They have to go seek out help. Shackleton decides he's going to take some of the men in the strongest lifeboat, and they're going to go to South Georgia Island to get help. He knows there are whaling stations there. There will be people there. There will be ships there that can rescue the rest of his men. But South Georgia Island is over 900 miles away from Elephant Island, where they are now. It's kind of their only option, though. That or just wait around to eventually run out of food and die. So that is what they do. Shackleton takes 5 men with him, and they set out for South Georgia Island to get help. And it takes them 2 weeks to get there. They survive hurricane force winds in the process, and they finally barely land on the southern shore of the island on May 9th. Very lucky to be alive. Now, rather than face the angry sea again after they just barely made it to land, Shackleton decides to set off across the land instead with 2 of the men to get to the whaling stations, which are on the north shore of the island. So it's a 32-mile journey over mountainous, icy terrain. They stick screws into the soles of their shoes to help with the climb. And they finally do. They reach the North Shore in about 36 hours on May 20th. Getting real wintry in these parts now, right? May 20th, we're like on the cusp of a winter here. So they get to the whaling stations, though, to people that can help them. And he immediately sends a boat to get the 3 guys that he left behind on the southern shore of the island. And then he starts organizing a rescue mission to go get the other 22 men who are still on Elephant Island waiting for rescue. These plans are foiled over and over again, though, by ice, right? It's winter now, which blocked access to the island. Shackleton can't get any help from the UK. World War I is raging. They cannot spare a ship. Eventually, he gets help from the Chilean government. Chile sends a ship which successfully reaches Elephant Island, but not until August 30th, 1916. According to Frank Worsley, the expedition's navigator who went with Shackleton to South Georgia Island on this rescue mission, Shackleton's hair turned gray between the time they reached the whaling station on South Georgia Island and when they finally rescued the men 3 months later. Such was the toll that this took on him. The men had been isolated there for over 4.5 months after Shackleton left to get help. They had been forced to kill the rest of the dogs, of course, and they had also been forced to eat the dogs, of course. But now the rescue party arrives, right? Shackleton is on this ship that was sent from the Chilean government, approaching Elephant Island, and all of the men on shore, this gives me chills, they line up on shore and they start waving at the rescue ship. I mean, can you imagine the sense of relief at seeing that ship approach, right? And Shackleton is there and he counts them. He counts the men, the waving men, 22 men. Everyone is still alive, miraculously, and they are rescued. But what about the Aurora, right? The other ship. There was another ship, part of this expedition, that headed to McMurdo Sound on the other side of Antarctica to lay the supply depots for their crossing of the continent. It actually didn't fare very well either. This group, called the Ross Sea Party, they dropped off 10 men, right, whose job it was to go place these supplies in these strategic locations. And then the ship, the Aurora, was blown from its anchorage and out to sea, where it drifted for months and months, unable to return to Antarctica. Now, it eventually gave up and headed back to New Zealand, leaving those 10 men behind. So after Shackleton rescues the men he left behind on Elephant Island, he makes his way to New Zealand to meet up with the Aurora, and together they go back to rescue the Ross Sea Party men. I don't know if the Aurora was just like, oh well, and it took Shackleton being like, no, we have to go get them for them to attempt the rescue. I don't know, but Shackleton makes it happen. They go back to rescue the men who had successfully completed their depot laying mission, by the way, although 3 of the men had died, including their leader, Ernest Shackleton. Although, you will be very pleased to hear that while 3 men in this group may have died, 3 of their dogs survived the ordeal. Okay, so all of that could have been viewed as an absolute disaster, right? Did Shackleton achieve his goal of crossing the continent of Antarctica? No, not even close. The mission failed almost immediately. They go back to Europe, which is being ravaged by the First World War, remember? And Shackleton, although too old to be drafted to fight and suffering from a heart condition, he volunteers to join the British Army, and he requests repeatedly to be sent to the Western Front in France, as if he hadn't faced enough peril yet, right? Guy is nuts. He's also heavily drinking at this point, of note. He was definitely an alcoholic. Sadly, 2 of the men who survived the Endurance expedition actually died fighting in World War I immediately afterwards. After the war, Shackleton set his sights on Antarctica once again. He prepares for another expedition without very clear goals this time. He's not going to try to cross the continent again. He's just going for fun, I guess, just to explore some more. So he gathers a crew. 8 of the men from the last expedition, the Endurance expedition, actually join him on this one, which says a lot after all that they went through, almost dying, that they would still stick by him and want to go back with him. But this expedition sadly was never to be. When they arrived in South America in Rio de Janeiro, Shackleton suffered a suspected heart attack. But no matter, he was determined. He refused medical intervention, got on the ship anyway, and headed to South Georgia Island, which they reached on January 4th, 1922. But the next morning, he must have really been feeling bad because he summoned the ship's doctor, Alexander Macklin, to his quarters. He was complaining of back pain and other various issues. Apparently, Macklin told him that he had been overdoing things. I mean, just a tad, and he should, quote, lead a more regular life. Maybe rowing 900 miles through ice and fighting in the front lines of World War I are a bit much. But Shackleton replied, quote, "You are always wanting me to give up things. What is it I ought to give up?" And Macklin answered, quote, chiefly alcohol, boss. But Shackleton didn't get a chance to give up alcohol or live a more regular life because a few moments later, right after this conversation, Ernest Shackleton suffered another, fatal this time, heart attack and died. His wife, Emily, requested that he be buried on South Georgia Island. Macklin recorded in his diary, quote, "I think this is as the boss would have had it himself, standing lonely on an island far from civilization, surrounded by a stormy, tempestuous sea, and in the vicinity of one of his greatest exploits." End quote. Shackleton wasn't really thought of much after his death. He wasn't like some big celebrity or well-known hero at first. He was a failure, really, right? He was a massive failure. Almost every single thing he attempted to do in his life had failed. He did not reach the South Pole first. He did not run a successful tobacco company or a stamp collecting company or a mine in Hungary. He did not become a successful politician. He never crossed the continent of Antarctica. He never even made it back there this fourth time around. And people just kind of forgot about him. It wasn't until a book came out in 1959 by Alfred Lansing called Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage, that people started to realize who Ernest Shackleton really was and how extraordinary his accomplishments actually were. No, he did not accomplish any of his goals except for one, a goal he had not set out to accomplish, an unanticipated goal. Rescue the men of the Endurance expedition. And it's this one accomplishment amongst Shackleton's many, many failures that sets him apart as a hero of history, the one he never set out to accomplish. And there is so much to learn from that. In that moment, in September of 1916, when the water starts rushing into the compromised hull of the Endurance, Shackleton has to shift. He has to pivot completely. He has to give up his goal of crossing Antarctica, the whole reason he's there, and he has to adopt a completely different goal of saving his men. Historian Nancy Cohen says in a Harvard Business School article, quote, "It's frequently very hard for people to do this, to give up on a long sought after goal. And yet sometimes the stakes can be as high as one's life and other people's lives. And so they were at that moment for Shackleton and his crew." End quote. And if you think about it, this new mission was much less self-serving. Shackleton had to sacrifice his own goals, his life's purpose, really, in order to save these people. His regard for human life really shone through. And although this man had failed at almost everything he had ever set out to do, he would not fail at this because it meant so much to him. It was of utmost importance. Nothing else mattered anymore in that moment. And that is what it took for Shackleton to finally be successful. The chances of rescuing all those men alive in those circumstances, slim to none. Slim to none. But Shackleton did it because he would not accept failure when it came to human lives. Cohen describes this mentality as sort of an old order, an old way of being that was largely lost in the carnage of the 20th century that started with the First World War. She says, and keep in mind, she's speaking within the context of Harvard Business School here. She says, quote, "The war opened a new century of human destruction on a scale that Shackleton could never have envisioned. In many ways, Shackleton was of an older world. One thing that is relevant about his moment to our own time is how it ends, with mass destruction. Destruction that would continue throughout the 20th century with 2 world wars, with mass genocide, with numerous terrible civil wars, the Holocaust, the nuclear age, and more recently for Americans with September 11th. So we, like Shackleton, have some taste of the power of man to destroy others." Shackleton saw that irony. He cannot not have seen it. The reputation and survival that meant everything to him meant seemingly very little to the larger world in 1916. It would wait for our moment to reclaim it, revalidate it, sanctify it, and learn from it. I want our students to see that irony. I wanted our students to also see that some of the valiance, integrity, compassion, and respect for individual life that was part of an older world and that was part of Shackleton did not die on the fields of Flanders. It lives in all of us. We live to serve ourselves, greater good, and our organizations. We live to serve with integrity. There are historians who have said that a particular code of behavior, a way of seeing the world, one often associated with an older feudal order, died with the First World War. I think it should live. I think it must live. I wanted our students, our executives, to believe it can live here and now. End quote. If you really think about it, in just one person's lifetime, they could have experienced, witnessed, been a part of World War I, the Russian Civil War, World War II, the Holocaust, the Cold War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Those global events spanned just 61 years, one person's lifetime. And Shackleton was setting out for the endurance expedition right at the cusp of it all. He had not yet been changed by the atrocities collectively experienced by humankind throughout the 20th century. He had not been desensitized to the loss of human life like those who would follow. And this can be seen in his unshakable determination to save the 27 men he brought with him on the Endurance. Shackleton possessed something that we desperately need today, something from the old order that has largely been lost: valiance, integrity, compassion, and respect for individual life, Cohen calls it. She stops at September 11th in her list of recent tragedies. That Harvard Business School article I quoted from was from 2014. But so much has happened between then and now. It goes so far past 9/11. According to the 2025 Global Peace Index, global conflict is currently at its highest level since World War II, with over 59 active conflicts raging in more than 35 countries. Russia is invading Ukraine. Children are starving in Gaza. Americans are being forced into detainment camps. Gun violence is surging. Mental health is declining. Climate change is causing devastating natural disasters, just like they warned us it would. Floods sweeping away our neighbors, our children. And yet, what are we focused on? Some tech CEO cheating on his wife at a Coldplay concert? Why are we still trying to cross Antarctica while 28 men are on the brink of death? Ernest Shackleton's story matters because it harkens back to an old way of being that was mostly lost during the trauma experienced throughout the last century. But it's not gone. It's still in us. That's still in us. And it's high time we find it and bring it back out. I wanted to package this long-awaited lesson up neatly and deliver it to you with a bow, but it's not really that kind of lesson. The story of Ernest Shackleton might mean different things to different people. What do you need to do in your own life? In what way do you need to shift or pivot? What do you need to give up in order to fail like Shackleton? To fail in a way that isn't failing at all. To fail successfully. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting and maybe you even learned something new. Be sure to follow my Instagram at History Fix Podcast to see some images that go along with this episode and stay on top of new episodes as they drop. I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen, and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix. Information used in this episode was sourced from Harvard Business School, BBC, ErnestShackleton.net, the Antarctic Heritage Trust, and Wikipedia. As always, links to these sources can be found in the show notes.